This presentation was made possible by the URI Master Gardener Program. The URI Master Gardener Program is part of the URI Extension, which provides science-based education and services to the citizens of Rhode Island, thanks to the work of their many volunteers. And our presenter today, Bill Baddeley, is one of those volunteers. Bill's a treasure trove of information when it comes to vegetable gardening, and he's always willing to give these talks here at the library. So we're very thankful to have him. And very fortunate to have him as a resource. So with that, I'm going to be turning things over to Bill.
All right, thanks, Cassie.
Thanks, Bill.
So Cassie's already said much of what's on this slide. Essentially, the extension program is a national outreach program that has offices in land-grant universities in all 50 states. And initially, in 1914, the congressional approval of the program was oriented to instructing farmers on better ways of dealing with crops and farm issues generally. And it's become now a lot more broad than that. But the Master Gardener program is essentially a public education service. There's a training period about a semester long at URI, and then a period of, period of service anyway. I did the Master Composting course in 2013. I did the Master Gardener program in 2014, and I do presentations of this sort. So the things that are interesting and probably most useful to you here, the Gardening and Environmental Hotline is staffed by people, volunteers, who are not only usually pretty experienced, but also well supplied with data to address pretty much any question that you care to put to them. So anytime you've got a question about something strange in the garden, give them a call, send them an email, and they will get you an answer. You can exchange pictures with them, and anything that's troubling you, they can help with. We also do soil testing. We'll come on to that in a little bit, but it's essentially an education program. So this is a talk that you can do in 4 sessions, say every quarter. You can do pieces of it. So, there's a seed starting talk. There are various odds and ends of aspects of vegetable gardening that we do talks about. This one is an attempt to give you a framework for thinking about the vegetable garden and the events that you see each year. And I'm hoping that this will be useful in sort of giving you the vision and perspective on vegetable gardening. But you'll almost certainly, especially if you're really just starting out, you'll have questions later. And so just in case there's any nervousness about that, there's a resource sheet that Cassie's going to make available, has made available. There is the University of Kentucky free home vegetable gardening manual. And it turns out that Rhode Island and Kentucky are in similar growing zones. So most of what's in that manual is helpful. And much of it is actually, direct map into Rhode Island. So the local library has always got resources of various sorts. And Sorry, I'm just trying to move this silly thing. Oh, well. And we have our environmental and gardening hotline where you can talk to people. But maybe if you're at all unclear about anything, the University of Kentucky manual is a really good thing. If you just put this ID 128 PDF into a search engine, it will bring you back this book. It's free. It's about 60 pages long. It's written by 6 professors from the life sciences department, entomologists and soil and plant science people and agronomists. And they've done what I consider to be a really great job. It's a free publication, so you can pick it up and read it in a browser. You can order it from them in a printed form, but I strongly recommend this. In the first 5 pages, they cover choosing a site, organic gardening fundamentals, preparing soil, preparing a new garden site, crop rotation, and pest control. So if you read the first 5 pages, you're already doing pretty well. So what vegetables need is water, because vegetable plants generally are like pumps that pull water out of the soil and do things with it, and then return some of that with products that they make. So water is really important, and keeping the water primed is important for the general health of the plant. If you get it to the point where it's starting to look a little droopy and dried, it's already having trouble that it won't be able to fully recover from. So attention to water is critical. Sunlight, 6 to 8 hours a day. The simplest way to look at whether you are getting the sunlight that will span the 6 to 8 hour period is to put your hand out, at about 75 degrees and point toward the south, and then look to either side, east and west, and see if that space of the sky where you're pointing at about 70 degrees is open. And if it is, then that's good. And the wider that open zone, the more sunlight you'll get each day. And if you don't have a spot where you can get that much sun, you can grow greens that don't really require quite the full sunlight that other things do. But if you're trying to grow peppers, tomatoes, things like that, they really do need 6 hours at a minimum. We need well-drained soil. We'll come on to talking about amending it with organic matter in the spring and fall. And something that may not be obvious at first is that they also need air, both above and below the soil line, because the leaves and roots breathe. So one of the potential troubles that you can run into is that if you put too much water on the plants, like big rainstorm will saturate the soil, but in ordinary garden soil that will drain after a bit. But if it's too long, and perhaps because of too much water coming in from an irrigation system, they can suffer. They need warmth and heat enough to keep them going. There is the spinach that if it's covered in a frame, can freeze, and so long as you don't pick it till it thaws again, it can come back. Other plants like tomatoes, they don't tolerate that at all. We need to provide basic nutrition, a band of nutrients in fertilizer, and we need to protect them from wind, pests, diseases. There are molds and fungi and things of that sort. And we're the only ones that can help with that. A lot of the plants that are very popular as food came from places that are much warmer than where we live. And so watching the timing in the growing season is important. And it's important to spend time in the garden, not just because it's good for you, but because it's good for the plants as well. So if you go out early in the morning and you are attentive to the tomato plants, you may find that there are tomato hornworms starting to show up on the plants, and you can just remove them if you spot them while they're out early in the day, for example. Okay. Well, I don't have a way to advance this, do I, or do I? No. So, Karen?
We have the next page. We're good.
Good.
Where to put the garden?
Excellent. So each year we have, the cycle of figuring out where to put a garden or an additional garden plot. We make a plan for the season, what things you want to grow, and a plan for when to plant them and whether to use seeds or nursery stock to get those plants going. We have a soil preparation problem to face. It's an opportunity, perhaps a better word. Composting, adding organic matter to the soil is extremely good for the soil. So in the spring, an inch of compost, even a half an inch of compost over the surface of the garden is a really helpful thing. Choosing plants and seeds, doing succession plantings. So, the tomatoes go in and they stay there. Same with the peppers. But then there are the lettuce, radish, sort of cyclical consecutive plantings that you can keep. Certainly, if you're careful about your selection of lettuce, you can keep lettuce going through a good part of the season just by planting a new little plot and taking out the roots of the old ones. Plant nurture and protection. Yes, and then at the end of the season, we put the garden to bed. So, there we go. Just a quick word about containers, because I know, some people grow some in the garden, some in containers. The challenge of containers is that they're limited. They don't have the soil horizon depth that garden soil does. So there are processes of water management that are easier to just let go in the garden, but you need to pay attention to containers. You want a reasonably chunky container, a few gallons is good. You want to use a soil-less potting mix for containers. If you use garden soil, it will essentially harden over the time that you try to grow things in it, because it doesn't have those deeper layers of the soil. So if you start with a potting mix and make drain holes in the bottom of the container and check the water each day, you can do well. And the reference, the sources from the talk will point you to useful sites and information about container gardening. So to the next one, this is location. So when you set out to locate a garden plot, you have a few things to think about. You want it to be south facing, or certainly to get full sun. So actually, if your plot is tilted to face south, every few degrees, kind of moves you closer to a warmer growing zone than where you would have been on flat land. And conversely, to the north, the raking angle of the plot will start to reduce the amount of heat and sun that you get. Out of the zone, at least 10 feet from buildings is important in Rhode Island and a lot of other places. If the building was built prior to 78, then you're running a risk of lead chalking off the paint on the side of the structure. And if you just move your garden out 10 feet from the wall of the house, then you're fine. We want to keep trees from impinging, so you need to take a look at the root zone of the tree. Is typically a bit wider than its drip line, and tree roots trying to compete with the tomatoes puts the tomatoes at a real disadvantage. Let's just say that. Okay. Well drained is important also. We want to keep it out of stream courses, places where water pools. And we want to protect the plants from high winds. So if you live in an exposed spot, if your garden is in an exposed spot, you can put a relatively short fence, a few feet even, across the prevailing direction of the wind. So if the wind's coming this way, you would build a fence across it like this. And it doesn't have to be a solid fence. In fact, it's almost better if it isn't. If you have pickets that are interfering with the wind, it deflects and interferes with the coherence of the wind that's coming in. So the air sort of gets swirled as it goes through the fence, and it protects plants for several feet back from such a fence. Right. Water source is important. Ideally, you can reach your garden with a hose, and it's good to have the garden near the kitchen door so that if you need some lettuce or an herb, you can just pop out and get it. Okay. So this is a picture, an illustration of, a couple of beds. So the usual thing is to try to make the beds about 4 feet wide, because you can then reach in from either side and get at least halfway across the bed. And 8 feet, if you have a 4 foot by 8 foot plot, that's quite a lot of growing space, and a couple of those is, if I were starting, I'd probably take a 4 by 8 plot and a few vegetables and see how that goes. But that's always up to you. There's a gardener who was very active in the 70s who moved out of New York, got a place in Connecticut, and had the local farmer plow up 2 acres. And it's way too much. She discovered that in a painful way and stopped after that, trying to occupy so much space. So that's these. You'll want to pay attention to things like how tall are the plants that you're going to put there, and try to put those on the north side, and then the lower plants, even beans would come next, bush beans below the tomatoes. So pay attention to the mature height of the plants. How tall do you expect these things to get? With tomatoes, it's common to put a trellis up so that they go 6 feet or so from the soil. And they will definitely interfere with anything else behind them. All right, that's enough of that, I think. All right, choosing plants. Grow vegetables that you like, or the people that you live with like. And in the first year, start small with a number of vegetables that are in that sort of zone of appeal. And you can start, you almost certainly will start with a combination of seeds and nursery plants. These days, there are providers of roots of nursery stock, for a wide variety of tomatoes, for example. You'll always get a little, have access to more variety, starting things from seed, but starting seeds indoors to take outdoors is another set of challenges. And we talk about that in separate talks, and you can read about it. And if you're ready to try that, then that's a good thing. But almost everyone starts out with purchased tomatoes that are in good shape and ready to go. All right, so that's the plant choosing. Oops. I don't know, this is probably good. Soil test and adjustments. It's important to do a soil test, at least initially. If you're at all worried about lead contamination, for instance, it's a good idea to get a test from either the University of Connecticut Soil Lab or the University of Massachusetts Soil Lab. They charge a fee for this. Last time I looked at the University of Connecticut, it was $12, maybe $15 now. You send them a soil sample. There's instructions on how to get that sample prepared for them, and they will send you back an assessment of the nutrients and the quality of the soil, and a whole set of recommendations on how you can improve the fertility of the soil. They also will do a lead test, and if that's in a low range, then it's perfectly good to go. I did one test at a site not terribly far from where I am, where we were putting in a garden as a demonstration, and we found that the lead levels were high enough that the EPA advice is don't let children play on this soil at all. So if that happens, then you can deal with that by putting up a raised bed with a soil root barrier in the base of it, and then you can do quite well and stay safe. All right. So preparing, first thing to do is remove any vegetation. And so you clumps of grass, old plant roots, any of that material needs to go. And then you can loosen the soil with a fork. You drive the fork into the soil, woggle it back and forth, and that opens up the soil, provides some aeration, loosens it, and if there's any old vegetation material, you'll find that when you start loosening the soil. And then each year, with an established bed, you'll have less trouble removing any vegetation, and you can just loosen that again. Right. If you have the energy or a compacted spot, you may want to look at double digging, and that's a process that is labor intensive, but really produces a nice result. And you essentially dig the first foot of soil up and out of a trench, then you loosen the subsoil and gradually move over the entire plot. And it's easier to see in a demonstration video than it is to tell you. So yeah, or adding organic matter and compost. Compost is really good to add because it adds live microbes and nutrients, but the real value is that it helps build soil structure. Okay. Then improving the soil. If you look at a forest floor, what's happening is plants are growing up and decaying, leaves are falling down and decaying, and microbes and small organisms, worms, work the soil and consume the organic matter and essentially improve the structure of the soil. And when you take a handful of that soil, it's almost like a sponge. You know, it has a lot of small holes and rivulets through it, and it holds water in surface tension. It holds nutrients that would otherwise wash through. Nitrogen is one that actually washes through no matter what. But the other nutrients mostly can be held in that soil, and the richer the humus layer is in your garden, the better it will do that, and it will hold water so that it is more resilient. If you miss a day or two of watering and there's a lot of sun, you can still get by. And it's where the live organisms are, and also fungi, and the interactions among plants and microbes and fungi and other elements in the soil is vast. There are fungi that will capture nematodes that, if the fungi weren't there, would enter the root of the plant that you're trying to get to grow vegetables, and do quite a lot of damage. So the more we can foster these cooperative partnerships, the better. Let's see. Five foot by 2 foot beds should be fine. That's just in answer to that question. So that's pretty much what I've got to say about humus, except there was a British biologist who started to look at humus, and I don't know how many graduate students he had to have to actually do this, but he took 3 tablespoons of soil, and then they just sort of unfolded all of the walls of the structure in the humus, and it covered a city block when they were done. So it's just staggering to the sort of thing I find very interesting. Caring for the soil. Once the plants are in, so you plant a tomato, and it's now gotten through the initial stage. In the initial stage, the tomatoes, once you've got them up and ready to grow, and the soil starts to warm, it is time to cover the soil around the plant with a layer of mulch. And that can be straw, it could be shredded newspaper, all sorts of things will work. And that tends to hold the moisture in and block heat. You need to put about 1 inch of water per week into the soil. So if you're getting rain at a rate that covers that, that's good. But we also have long periods where we don't get a lot of rain. And you can set up a rain gauge, just a can and a ruler, so that you can measure just how much is accumulated since the last time you looked. But the simplest thing to do is to take a finger, poke it down to the first joint, and see if the soil is damp. If it's soggy, you definitely don't want to add more water. If it's damp, it's okay. If it's feeling dry and crumbly, it's time to add water. So you can do that pretty much any day while you're out in the garden. Fertilizer. You get a balanced fertilizer, and there's good information on fertilizers in the reference materials, but I use a simple balanced fertilizer with some trace elements, and you just take small amounts of that and spread it on the soil every few weeks. It's important for the nitrogen flow to do that, and yeah, and that basically, when you remove a crop, say some lettuce or spinach or some carrots, whatever it may be, and you get ready to replant in that space, scattering some fertilizer over that soil before you replant is helpful. Let's see. And then in the autumn, we mulch for winter protection. And in the spring, we move the mulch aside and plant. And then again, when the planting is done, you move the mulch back around the plants. Okay. And the 5 inches of organic matter mulch on top of the soil in the autumn does help keep the plants and the soil safe over the winter. And once you've got a bed that's developing humus and is growing plants, you need not to walk on it. It'll carry a squirrel without too much damage, but not a human being. I keep dogs out when I possibly can, but there are a lot of dogs in my neighborhood, and occasionally they come through. But you want not to have a lot of disturbance on that soil. Okay. So some plants will go directly from seed: peas, carrots, radishes, beans, lettuce. Some things are from tropical places or subtropical places, and they need a head start in order to have a chance of developing and fruiting in our climate. And then some grow from last year's harvest. The simplest way of propagating them is vegetative. So you cut a seed potato into a few pieces, you plant those. Garlic, you take the cloves off the bulb and you plant those. Garlic goes in the autumn. So a planting calendar is a good thing to have. And in the resource sheet, there's a pointer to the planting calendar, which is on the next slide, or at least the first piece of it is. So if you can make this out, there are a few basic symbols. The S is started from seed, directly in the soil. The I is for started indoors. So cabbage and cauliflower really need to be started indoors in early March. The tomatoes, which are on the next page, if we shift over to that, are midway down. We've got the peppers and the tomatoes, and those are transplanted usually at the end of May. The soil is warmed up enough for a transplant to go in. So you can start them at home where the little eyes for indoor starting are in the chart. And then T for transplant is take it outside and put it in the soil. And a nursery plant, once you're at that stage, Memorial Day and beyond, we're typically free of frost by then, and we've got conditions that will let those plants grow. Do the transplantation, then you are good to go. And then where you see a string of S's, like the radishes or the rutabagas or the lettuce, basically every time you harvest a head of lettuce or whatever the radishes, you can use that space again for the same or for a different crop. So the succession plantings are available for a lot of these crops. This is an online resource from URI. You can look for it. It's easy enough to find. If you just say URI planting calendar, it'll pop up. All right. So, in order to do the planting from seed, or even to plant a tomato that you bought from a nursery, you need to take a look at the advice that a book on gardening, the University of Kentucky manual, a similar sort of thing will give you about how to get it into the soil properly so that it can support itself. For seeds, it's mostly how deep to plant them. And, if you don't have any information, just plant them about as deep as the seed is big, poke them into the soil, cover them up. But the seed packet will tell you quite a lot about the plant and how it responds to planting, and give you advice about how deep, how far apart, things of that sort. If you're planting densely, like using a square foot gardening kind of model, you can use the seed spacing numbers for putting the seeds in the ground. If you're growing in rows, then there's advice on how far apart the rows should be. And whenever you're planting a nursery plant, you should take a look at the root ball when you remove it from its pot and make sure, a lot of times the roots will be beginning to circle. Break those apart before you put it into the ground. Okay. So there are a few tools that are helpful to have. A chair or a bench of some kind in the garden, so that when you're out there, you have a place to sit and observe from. The garden spade and fork, the spade for defining the edges of a plot, the fork for loosening the soil. Weeders are good. I tend to grow things in pretty tight concentrations, so I have this tool that is compact enough that it can reach in between the plants and not disturb them unduly. And this kind of tool is becoming more common, and it's an even finer, less wide. You can scratch the weeds out easily with a tool like this. And these things come with long handles or short handles. And if If you're trying to grow things on an intensive basis, they're really quite useful. And then there's a weeding knife, trowel, that sort of thing can be handy if you're trying to deal with deeper rooted weeds. Bypass pruner is really helpful to have. It's called a bypass pruner because the blades cut past each other like scissors. They're not. There's also anvil pruners where the blade comes down onto a block and cuts the stem, but these are bypass pruners. This is one of the most helpful tools to have because it's good for harvesting, it's good for pruning things off, and general garden work. You use it quite a lot. Need a hose, watering can to do the irrigation work. Gloves are helpful if you're wrestling with things. Labels are really important. When you put something in the ground, if you put a label there as well, you'll thank yourself later. And it's especially true in greenhouse or indoor starting of plants to do that. A notebook and a pencil. Keeping track of what you've done and when is really a good idea because you'll be able to see what's happening and you'll be able to look back and see what might have been affecting the plant. And you also will use that information for crop rotation, some form of rotation where you move. There are a large number of options, but you're essentially trying to move the plants to a different place, either because they're heavy feeders or they're light feeders. The light feeders can follow the heavy feeders. The light feeders allow more concentration of nutrients for a heavy feeder to follow them. But you're also trying to keep the plants moving away from where they were last year, especially with root vegetables or other pests that drop into the soil and then come out in larval form in the spring. You need to just pay attention to moving those plants along. What you want is for the tomato pests, when they show up, to not find the tomatoes next year. So, planting guides, again, a basic manual on vegetable gardening will give you a lot of information about the characteristics of the plants, protection, the kinds of pests, all of that. Right. So, and looking further, once you've got the basic rhythm of the gardening going, you might look at doing some composting. You might look at doing some seed starting, seed saving for varieties you especially like, and other things. And we can make those available in talks. So always remember that the hotline is looking for new challenges. So when you find a problem that's particularly confusing to you, you should definitely call those people. So that's what they like. Right, and finally, enjoy the garden. It's a wonderful place to be, and paying attention to what's going on there is good for the plants and good for us as well. So, thank you for your patience and attention. And if you have any questions, we'll take a shot at answering them.
Thank you, Bill. And I just want to mention too that that Bill, along with a few other volunteers from the Master Gardeners, have done some really great presentations from us in the past, and you can find those on our YouTube channel as well. I think we do have one on seed starting. in there, at least a couple more. So if you want to check those out, that could be helpful. And also a shameless plug that we have our seed library here at the library too. It was recently stocked, so we have a ton of vegetable seeds. Again, a lot of them are provided by the URI Master Gardener program and the Cooperative Extension. So yeah, come visit us, come get some seeds. And thank you, Bill, for today.
So where can we get your seeds?
So if you come to the library on the second floor, if you come up the elevators, you'll see it right there. Or you
Okay.
can ask at the desk and we can point you in the right direction.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of
I got
course.
some of those last year. It was awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been very popular. We love it.
Thank you
Alrighty.
so much, Bill.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good night,
Bill.
all.
Yep, I'm going to stop the
Thank you.
recording.